Welcome back to GreenBites, Sustainable Asia's weekly environmental news podcast. I'm Koa Tran.
And I'm Shriming Lee.
In less than 10 minutes, we offer you bite-sized green updates in Asia we think you should know about.
It's good to be back. Let's dive right in. In our last episode, we've seen how Indonesia has been making a few headlines in climate news, and the trend is continuing.
Makes sense. The country is rich in both marine and land biodiversity. Its rainforests are the world's third largest ones after Brazil and the Democratic Republic of Congo.
And this is where our first story takes us, to Indonesia's rainforests. Koa, did you know that one of the world's biggest causes of greenhouse gas emissions comes from deforestation and forest degradation?
This doesn't surprise me. The United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or UNFCCC, has negotiated a scheme to reduce deforestation in 2005, and in 2013, the rules were further clarified. The scheme is called Reducing Emissions from Deforestation and Forest Degradation, or REDD+.
REDD+ aims to reduce deforestation by paying countries to not cut down their trees. Countries have to report on metrics measuring carbon emission curves set by the scheme and receive a payment based on their results. The idea is that the payment incentivizes participating countries to preserve their forests and compensates them for otherwise exploiting their forests for economic gains.
So on paper, this is a great idea, and even the UNFCCC agrees that this is a major help to curb carbon emissions in agriculture, forestry, and other land uses sectors. But coming back to Indonesia, Charmaine, does the country participate in REDD+?
Yes, it did until very recently. Indonesia had signed a letter of intent with Norway back in 2010, agreeing that Norway would pay Indonesia $1 billion to curb its emissions from deforestation under the REDD+ scheme. Yes, that's $1 billion.
Oh, whoa. But you said until very recently, right? What happened to the agreement? Did Indonesia not meet its targets?
It's a little more complex. Indonesia was actually the one who determined the agreement. Although the country claims to have fulfilled all requirements for the payments to be made, Norway has yet to disburse the funds, according to Alun Dohan, the Indonesian Deputy Minister for Environment and Forestry. Norway takes a different stance, claiming that discussions around payment terms were, quote, constructive and progressing well, up until the termination.
Yeah, I can imagine a few environmentalists were disappointed by this decision. But how is it going to affect Indonesia's commitment to deforestation, though?
Well, Indonesia said it is committed to continue reducing greenhouse gas emissions despite this. And Norway has acknowledged Indonesia's progress and achievements towards its Paris Agreement obligations and said it would continue supporting the country's deforestation efforts. Norway also recognized Indonesia having, among other countries too, quote, the lowest rate of deforestation in the past 20 years, including the significant reduction in forest fires.
It's true that Indonesia's deforestation rate hit a historic low in 2020, more precisely at a rate of 75% lower than in 2019, following a downward trend ever since 2014 and 2015. And this does raise the question of whether REDD+ in practice would require some more fine-tuning, let's say. In any case, it will be interesting to keep track of deforestation in Indonesia in the coming months. In other interesting news, China has just opened its first vitrification plant.
Vitrification? What's that?
Well, I'm glad you asked. It refers to a process of turning waste from nuclear power plants into glass, making it easier for storage.
Oh, right. Nuclear power plants produce a lot of energy, but also the byproduct of the process can't easily be disposed of and needs to be stored safely underground.
Yeah, that's right. But since nuclear waste is also radioactive, a few things need to happen before it can properly be stored to prevent leakages of all sorts. The waste first needs to be processed.
And so turning it into glass makes it safer?
Yep. Technically, it is mixed with other materials, glass included, before it becomes glass itself. The idea is to turn high-level radioactive waste, which is liquid, into a more stable solid for safer storage.
Is this how all nuclear waste is now handled?
Well, usually vitrification is reserved for what's known as high-level waste, which only accounts for about 1% of nuclear waste, but still requires our careful attention. Other kinds of waste, intermediate and low-level wastes, are disposed in other ways, one of which is called cementation, which, as the name suggests,
turns the waste into cement. Makes sense that all things considered, there would be different ways to dispose of different types of nuclear waste. So back to this new vitrification plant in China.
And so while vitrification is good on paper and all, applying it to a large scale is where the challenge is. Other countries like France, the UK, the US, to name a few, have set up vitrification plants to handle nuclear waste. But things get more interesting when another industrial power like China also steps into the game.
For sure. This comes a few months after Japan announced they'd be slowly releasing Fukushima nuclear waste into the water too. I remember thinking back then there must have been an alternative to that solution.
The new Chinese vitrification plant opened in Guangyuan in the Sichuan province on September 11th and is expected to process hundreds of cubic meters of high-level waste every year. Interestingly enough, the project was designed jointly by China and Germany. Germany, who as we know has been curbing its domestic nuclear energy dependency following the Fukushima incident.
Next up, let's look at another thing that we've all been taken for granted thus far into the climate crisis: food security.
A survey from a Singapore research institute shows that over 80% of professionals in Southeast Asia believe that climate change is threatening food security in the region. This should come at no surprise since we've previously covered how extreme weather events in recent years have disrupted agriculture.
Looking into the details of the survey, respondents from the Philippines are the most worried about food supply, because the country suffered some of the worst typhoons in its history last year. They damaged agricultural production and stoked fears. Another reason is, of course, the warming climate that makes it harder for some species to keep growing in certain areas.
And although Singapore is affluent, the nation relies heavily on imports for most of its food. So if neighboring countries suffer a loss in harvests, the city-state won't be immune. What's also alarming is that only 1 in 5 professionals surveyed agreed that their respective governments have launched policies or plans to safeguard agriculture against climate change. And even if there are some in place, 1/4 said the policies are under development.
And while stakeholders conceive new relevant policies, let's also not lose sight of how to slash greenhouse gas emissions in food production at the same time. A research paper from Nature highlights aquatic food, so-called blue foods, in contributing to food security.
Oh, interesting. But what exactly are blue foods?
So, blue foods include fish and shellfish, as well as a wide array of animals, plants, and algae harvested from rivers, seas, and the ocean. They provide protein and other nutrients for over 3.2 billion people in the world. Among them, scientists found that shellfish and fish from the open ocean contain richer nutrients, including omega-3, vitamins A and B12, calcium, iodine, iron, and zinc. Farmed aquatic foods are also found to emit lower emissions than foods gathered from the wild. Harnessing the power of blue foods is increasingly important, as Asia is estimated to lead the way in freshwater fish consumption in 2050.
So this is all we have for this week's Green Bites. If you have any news stories you think we should highlight, let us know on our social media platforms with the hashtag #ShareYourBite.
And don't forget to subscribe to our podcast channels for more content and share our podcast with your friends and family. If you're interested in sponsoring GreenBites or have any comments about our content, we would love to hear from you. Email us using communications@sustainableasia.co or drop us a line on social media. Our handle is @sustainableasia. Thanks for listening.